Greetings to all of you in Taiwan from California. I'm Frans Lanting, and I'm going to share images and stories with you about the relationship between people and nature. As a photographer of nature, I could live anywhere, but I've chosen to make my home in California's Monterey Bay, just south of San Francisco. It is a place of abundance, as these feeding humpback whales show, with fish spilling out of their mouths and gulls flying overhead. It may seem hard to believe, but 100 years ago, this region was an ecological disaster. It had been stripped of its natural resources. In the sea, the whales had all been killed, and on land, the forest had been cut. Yet this place rebounded because a next generation of people cared about nature and they acted together. Healing our relationship with nature is a big challenge, no matter where we live. And I came from this place in the Netherlands, where we had big challenges to resolve as well. I'd like to share what I learned from working with nature and people around the world. A little bit about my personal background. I grew up in the Netherlands, where I was educated as an environmental economist. I grew up in this small village with all these roofs, with red houses, and that village had been around for many centuries, and then modern industry moved in. I moved to California to do research. I was interested in learning how people could better coexist with nature. But after I arrived in California, I began to dream, like many people who move here. I changed careers and I became a photographer. And my new job became making animals look good. That can be a little bit challenging when you're faced with elephant seals, but once you get past his big nose, his eyes will tell you a lot more about his mindset. I like to do deep dives into the lives of individual animals, the wild places they depend on, and how they are impacted by us. These are white rhinos in Africa. Every one of the many stories that I've produced for National Geographic expanded my understanding about the connections between people and nature. I've seen the natural world change dramatically in the course of my lifetime, from the melting ice in Antarctica that is now affecting coastlines everywhere because of sea level rise, to the giant succulent trees in southern Africa which are stressed by climate change, just like plants are in many other places. When I work with wild animals, I like to see the world through their eyes. This image portrays elephants as many of us prefer to see them, by themselves. But wild animals are hemmed in by people on every continent. After a safari lodge in Zambia expanded its footprint across a trail that elephants were used to get to a favorite wild mango tree, they now walk through the lodge of that safari lodge to reach that same tree. Elephants need space, and so do these cheetahs. These are the last cheetahs surviving in Asia. They live in Iran. They're on the brink of extinction, in a place that used to be a Garden of Eden, as shown in this famous carpet. Today, that same place is a stark desert with degraded habitat. And that is where I joined a team of Iranian conservationists setting up camera traps to photograph cheetahs. The leader of that team, Human Jaukar, who is in this group of people, is now in jail, along with his colleagues. They're wrongfully accused of using their camera traps to spy. But as a photographer who's used camera traps for years, I can tell you that that is impossible. Camera traps can only capture pictures of animals within a very short range. So This was a political accusation, and these conservationists in Iran who've now been in jail for several years need to be freed so that they can go back to doing their work. The plight of cheetahs in Asia is joined with the justice for the people who care about them. Without people being able to do their work, there will be no future for cheetahs or for other endangered animals anywhere else. I want to take you to another place, to the land of lemurs, which are found nowhere but on the big island of Madagascar off the coast of Africa. This is the largest of all the lemurs in Madagascar. It is called an indri, but in Madagascar local people call it babakut, which means cousin to man, because people there recognize the kinship between the lemurs and themselves. Madagascar is also the land of baobabs. There are more species of baobabs there than anywhere else on Earth. And the largest bird that ever evolved on planet Earth also occurred only in Madagascar. It produced eggs the size of footballs, as you can see here in this portrait of a man holding up the egg of the elephant bird. The bird itself is now extinct because of overhunting, but the eggs are still around. In the course of my work in Madagascar, documenting its fabulous nature, I came upon this place, the lost world of the Tsingy of Bemaraha. I had to charter a plane to fly over it to get a sense of what it looked like. There were no pictures of it before I did this. It was literally a lost world. On the ground, I met with the one and only person assigned to protect this place, Mr. Toko Bay. He was a forest warden. He hadn't been paid in a year, and his phone had not worked in a long time either. Here he's holding up the tail of an endangered lemur. Thanks to the photos published in the National Geographic of this amazing place, it became a national park. And when I went back there a few years ago, I made prints of Mr. Toko Bay, and through sheer luck, I connected with his son in Bemaraha. He was surprised that I'd known his father, and here he is posing with a portrait of his father from 30 years ago. Mr. Toko Bay's son has become a guide in the National Park of Bemaraha, and he was so excited that he asked his brothers to join in, and here they are posing together with the oldest son of his younger brother, who is now also in training to become a tour guide. Caring for nature has become a family tradition among the Toko Bays. But parks in Madagascar are in trouble. They have fragile boundaries because of population pressures, poverty, and also because of climate change. The forests in Madagascar keep losing grounds, as you can see in this aerial photo. And the mighty baobabs stand as reminders of a former forest, but they too are being cut down to the ground. And this farmer, with his manioc crop, will also become a victim of the same problems. He can till the soil for maybe 2 to 3 years before the nutrients are gone, and then he will have to move on. And that is the tragedy of people in nature in Madagascar. It is really difficult for them to coexist if we don't help them change their ways. In the mountains of Mexico, I encountered a tattered monarch butterfly drinking from a stream after this same butterfly had flown for more than 1,000 miles to reach an overwintering site a discovery that was first published in National Geographic almost 50 years ago. Many millions of butterflies gather there in spectacular numbers. They hibernate during the winter. They need a special microclimate. It can't be too warm, but also not too cold, and they need a source of water nearby. And the only place that suits them is this forests of firs and pines. When I first went there in the 1980s, several decades ago, the future of the forest was uncertain. People were burning it. They wanted to get more pasture for their cattle, and they wanted to take away the trees as firewood and construction wood in their villages. I met a man there, Alejandro Mondragon. He was inspecting the local butterflies. Of course, he knew they were coming there every year, and they thought, this is nothing special because we see them here every year. Don't you have millions of monarchs where you live? No, of course not. This is the only place in the world where they survive every winter. Every year, when the monarchs came back, during Alejandro's early life, there was less and less forest, as you can see here. But when I returned recently, I flew a drone over the same area, and you can see the changes. There are more houses, but notice they're bigger now, which is an indication that people are doing better. They're more prosperous, but at the same time also the forest is being regrown, and that helps people and nature in the long run. Now, I had returned to the mountains of Mexico with a print of my earlier encounter with Alejandro, and then I searched for him, and here we are reunited 30 years later, posing for a picture with a mural of monarch butterflies behind us. Monarchs have become popular symbols for nature in this area. They've become a tourist attraction. Thousands of visitors now come to see them every winter. And this is a reserve established by the local community. They're in charge of the operation. It's run like a national park. There's no doubt that people now care more about monarchs because it's in their own best interest. Who doesn't like a monarch butterfly anyway? They're wonderful symbols of nature. Every spring, when the weather warms up, monarchs emerge from their hibernation, and they fly back to the United States and to Canada in an amazing migration that recognizes no political boundaries. It connects people across all of North America. But the future of the monarch's migration is now threatened by something else. Not by local people cutting down trees in their forest, but by the collective activities of all of us. Again, there are the impacts of climate change. It may get too warm soon in these mountains of Mexico to sustain the winter hibernation needs of monarch butterflies. We're moving continents again. We're back in Asia now. The wild horses of Mongolia have been brought back from the brink of extinction. Their population was reduced to a handful of individuals in European zoos. There were no more wild horses left in Mongolia, and nobody believed that there was a future for them except in zoos as relics from the past. But a stubborn group of Dutch women led by Inge Bouwman here in the center, made the impossible happen. They became champions for an amazing rewilding project. They nurtured horses back into nature from captivity to free-roaming family groups in pastures. In the Netherlands first, before they were flown back to Mongolia, and I was there at the moment when one of the first groups was released into the wilds of Hustenuru National Park. The horses bonded instantly because they had been raised together, as family groups, and now there are hundreds of wild horses roaming the hills of Husten-Nuru in their ancestral homeland. The rewilding of another horse in Europe is taking place on the floodplains of the major rivers in the Netherlands and in Germany. They are helping these floodplains to become more ecologically healthy. And here's a photo that I made of an encounter between two males who were battling it out during a spring encounter. Now you may wonder, how do I get a photo like that? Well, I always pay attention to what the animals are telling me. I approach quietly and slowly, and when they're not responding in a negative way to my presence, I ease in a bit more closely. I give them a chance to decide whether I am there in the right space or whether I need to back off again. And here's a short video clip to show you what led to this previous image. You can see I'm very close, but I'm lying flat on the ground. Of course, the horses know I'm there, and of course they don't want to trample me. They're just busy with each other. Knowing about the animals before you aim a camera at them is one of the keys to my success as a wildlife photographer. This is one of the favorite animals I've ever worked with. It is a giant anteater. It lives only in the grasslands of South America. Their eyesight isn't great. They find the ants that they need by sniffing for them on the ground, and when they cross roads that now are going across their habitat in these grasslands, they get killed more and more. In Argentina, these women are involved in bringing giant anteaters back to a place where they had disappeared, where they'd been shot, the Ibarra wetlands in northern Argentina. Chris Tompkins is leading that project. She and her late husband, Doug Tompkins, have enabled the rewilding of nature on a very large scale. They acquired rundown sheep farms and then nursed them back to ecological health, like this area called Chacabuco, which has now become Patagonia National Park. After Chris and Doug nurtured it back to environmental sanity, they turned it over to the people of Chile, who can now visit. It is part of everyone's natural legacy. Wildlife is returning to Chacabuco, now Patagonia National Park. These are guanacos. They're members of the camel family, and they're attracting apex predators. Nature abhors a vacuum. That is one of the things that we've learned from centuries of science. When there's prey, the predators will find them. This cat is called a puma in South America, but it is known by many different names because it has a huge range. It occurs from Alaska to Patagonia. And wherever we care for nature, pumas do well. They've bounced back in California where I live. I coexist with them. I know that they roam around the place we call home. But even though I've been looking for them for 30 years, I've only seen them once with my own eyes. But my camera traps record their passing, and that is how I captured this photo of a shy mountain lion. They're really good at avoiding people, but they can get in trouble when they have to explore new ground, when young animals have to disperse to find territories of their own. Highways are major obstacles where cats can get killed by cars when they try to cross. And of course, that is a problem wherever large predators have to coexist with people in populated areas. But roads can be adapted to let animals move around too. It took years to convince the government in our area to build an underpass for mountain lions at a crucial spot along a busy commuter highway. And it took a lot of lobbying, and I was part of that effort. But now it is becoming a reality. You can see the underpass beginning to happen at this highway. And more are planned now. Creating connectivity between protected areas is a big challenge, no matter whether you live in California or whether you live in Taiwan or in other places around the world. We need to connect these protected areas so that animals can move between them when they need to. This ranch with new homes at its boundary is an important stepping stone of habitats. It was acquired recently in our area by a local land trust that has a long-term vision of the future. This is where I live, Monterey Bay. I imagine some of you listening to me today have had the pleasure to visit the coast of California, and you may have traveled along Highway 1. It passes through Monterey Bay between San Francisco and Los Angeles. 1 million people live here. It is not exactly pristine. Many more people pass through as visitors, and yet people and nature can coexist here in complex ways. Within sight of Highway 1 that runs along the coast, thousands of seals and sea lions are packing beaches, and that scene relies on protection and on tolerance. Land and sea connect here in an extraordinary way, as anyone knows who's been to the coast of California. Land and sea connect here in an amazing way, and the fog and the coastal clouds now unite land and sea in this image. Monterey Bay is the hottest hotspot for biodiversity in all of North America because we have many different kinds of landscapes. Onshore, with many different climates, and then offshore, we have an intricacy of intertidal and deep sea habitats as well. And when you add those two together, there are very few places like it on a global scale. Here's a map to orient you. To the north of this map is the San Francisco Bay Area with Silicon Valley off to the side. You can see San Jose. Santa Cruz is where I live. Some of you may be familiar with Monterey a bit farther to the south, and then yet farther is Big Sur, and then off the map to the south is Los Angeles. And you can see the deep marine canyons, you can see the mountains onshore. I'm a lucky guy to live here. There are parallels here between the forest of redwood trees standing tall on land and the forest of kelp swaying offshore. Both are giant plants in their own right, and they live within miles of each other. A century ago, it would have been very hard to find any redwood trees here, or any whales for that matter. The marine abundance had been decimated by whalers who wiped out local whale populations during an intense period of exploitation. And the California gold rush of 1848 triggered a massive logging boom, and within 50 years the mountains were clear-cut. But a historic turnaround began in 1902, a bit more than a century ago, when the last big redwood trees were protected in California's first state park in a place called Big Basin. And it was thanks to these local activists. They look very well dressed, but they were really the first modern tree huggers. Their efforts marked the beginning of a new era of restoration of nature. Artists and activists banded together with business people and with politicians, and they launched a successful campaign together. And that formula of people from different backgrounds gathering and working things out together has been a successful formula here many times since. Today, ancient redwood trees stand as monuments to activism at the edge of the San Francisco Bay Area for millions of people to appreciate. These researchers are putting instruments on elephant seals When that elephant seal leaves the beach and goes back into the Pacific Ocean, these instruments are tracking where they go. And then when the seal comes back, they take off the data and they learn about the amazing movements of that one individual elephant seal. All these researchers are part of a new knowledge economy at the edge of Silicon Valley, where people are crunching data in ever bigger numbers. And these researchers now depend on a high-quality natural environment to do their work. More than 2,000 people like them are employed in marine research around Monterey Bay. It is the highest concentration of ocean scientists anywhere, and it shows that a whole new economy can arise when we care for nature and we nurture a high-quality environment back to the way it used to be. But it's not the only thing we need. I feel we need to connect modern knowledge and technology with ancient wisdom. Not long ago, a group of indigenous people, the Amamutsen, gathered for a ceremony that had not been performed here in more than 200 years. The Amamutsen came together in a place close to where I live to pay tribute to salmon at the onset of the winter rains. At a coastal bluff near a village site where their ancestors had lived for countless generations, voices reached out to sing the salmon back into a nearby creek where a dam had been removed. And less than a year later, scientists found salmon and their relatives, the steelhead trout, in the same stream from which they had been barred for many generations because of that dam. And a new page was turned in the healing of nature and culture from a period of oppression. This is one of my favorite birds, the peregrine falcon. They occur in many different countries, including in parts of Asia. They are the fastest birds on earth. And yet they could not escape the poisonous effects of DDT, an awful pesticide in the 1960s. This pesticide thinned their eggshells, and the parents crushed their unborn chicks when they were incubating the eggs. Their population crashed until there were only 2 pairs of peregrines left in entire state of California. But after DDT was banned in 1972, peregrines have bounced back. It took politicians to change the law and dedicated falconers to rewild the birds. So just as with the comeback of the redwood trees, it took a combination of people with different expertise and different background to make this a success story. 100 years ago, you would have only seen stumps of trees at this overlook instead of full-grown trees. But now, a forest has grown back, and much of it is protected. It is the coastal fog that keeps the trees growing, but its future is uncertain, again, because of climate change, which has its impacts around the world. So here's a question for all of you. First of all, you may wonder, did this surfer really stay ahead of that giant breaking wave? Yes, he did, because he's a really good surfer. He lives in my hometown of Santa Cruz. His name is Peter Mel, and he's one of the few that dared to surf this gigantic wave north of Santa Cruz. But this image is symbolic. It's not just a picture of a big wave surfer. This giant wave symbolizes the power of the ocean and also the power of the storms that are becoming more and more like threatening events, again, because of climate change. The question that I would like to pose to you, now that you've heard the story so far, is whether we may have learned enough from our mistakes in the past and our achievements recently to adapt to the new expressions of nature. We need to be able to ride the shock waves of change that we will all be faced with during the next 50 years. We all need to become good at riding these waves of change. Nature is now pummeling us at the coast of California, at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, with winter storms we now call atmospheric rivers. They come at us and pummel us with shock waves, but also with rain that lasts for days, sometimes weeks on end. And we have mega fires, also caused by extreme weather, that is now part of our new reality here. In 2020, massive fires burned all of the protected areas in Big Basin and far beyond. The flames reached hundreds of feet up into the crowns of ancient redwood trees. It was the biggest fire in centuries, and it burned all the way down to the beach where I made this photo. It was heartbreaking to go into the forest when there was nothing but smoke and ash afterwards. The redwoods looked broken, but within months they began to resprout, and that gave me hope. It affirmed the resilience of nature. People do not bounce back from a big fire like redwood trees can. My friends Anne and Matt Rowley were among the many hundreds of families who lost everything they had in that big fire. And the cost and complications of rebuilding their home in a fire zone made them decide to move. They've now become part of a new population trend in California. They are climate refugees. From a window seat in an airplane 30,000 feet up, going between Europe and North America, you cross Greenland, and you can see for yourself how the ice is melting fast in the high Arctic. Down on the ground, from a water level perspective in Greenland, you can see how giant icebergs are disintegrating very rapidly. And people there will tell you that the weather's become very different in their own lifetime. The fate of ice in the polar regions is linked to the survival of forests in the tropics, like the big rainforest in Borneo and other parts of Southeast Asia. And what links them is us. Because no matter where we are having an impact on the planet. We now know that this is a reality. And I'm saying this not to accuse anyone of anything, it's just a reality. There are 8 billion people on the planet, and we all aspire to a modern lifestyle that has consequences for the natural world. Now, I don't want to deny anyone a place to live and a vehicle or other ways to move around, but we need to recognize that we need to offset the consequences of our modern lifestyle by taking care of nature. And it's only when we take care of nature that nature can take care of us. We depend on nature whether we realize it or not. Forests exhale the oxygen that we depend on every minute of our lives. And forests are carbon banks that offset the effects of our lifestyles. They absorb the carbon emissions from our fossil fuels that we burn every single day. But down below, this is an aerial view, they also shelter our closest relatives on the tree of life, the bonobos, which I've covered for National Geographic in a story. I'd like to end this presentation on a hopeful note. I know we get bad news every single day, but I do believe that there is a way out. And I share that belief with many scientists and many activists and many politicians, because if we band together, then we can overcome the challenges that we are all faced with now. If we can set aside 30% of the world's wild places by 2030, we begin to make a big step in the right direction. And growing that to 50% by 2050 is a more ambitious target. It will take all of us to achieve that. But working locally, close to home, embrace a project, join a group, document a local project you believe in, and stretching ourselves across continent and uniting globally, we can overcome many other boundaries. We have to get there together. In conclusion, I would like to remind ourselves, all of us, that we came from nature. We are part of nature. We are all members of a living planet. This tiny primate called a mouse lemur that lives only in Madagascar is a distant relative of all of us on the tree of life. We're all family. We're sitting together on this tree of life on the same branch. Humans, bonobos, mouse lemurs, gorillas, we are all part of the same family. Will you join me in taking care of our family together? Thank you. I learned about nature from places close to where I grew up in the Netherlands. And when I picked up a camera, I could not travel to any big places far beyond the city where I was a student. And I began to visit a city park to document the 4 seasons. It was easy for me to do. It was only 10 minutes from where I lived, and I went there many times. And the more I went there, the more sensitive I was becoming to the subtle changes that happen every day and through the seasons. And that was a way for me to enter nature. And nature spoke back to me. I believe that no matter where you live, whether you're in a city or in a town or in a village, there's always a way to connect with nature nearby. And I found that both very inspiring and also very empowering, because after doing this project for a year, I had enough photos to put together an exhibition. And then people saw my pictures, and that gave me more energy to carry on with other projects. And it also forced me to look very small. I think the problem today, when you start out of it as a photographer, is that, of course, you look through the pages of National Geographic and you think, well, I would love to do that. But you set the bar very high for yourself if you try to do something that took an experienced photographer many months to accomplish in isolation in a place in Africa. So I think it's better to start close to home and then take steps towards bigger and bigger ambitions as you go along. Ask people to comment on your pictures and then see what is the best next step for you to take. So if you want to enter pictures in the photo contest that is being sponsored, then I will be happy to look at some of the final results and you'll hear my feedback.